The House impeached President Trump for a historic second time. Lawmakers voted 232 to 197 to impeach Mr. Trump on a single article of impeachment. The charge is incitement of insurrection. The vote comes exactly 1 week after rioters stormed the Capitol after the president urged them to, quote, fight like hell against the election results. Here's what Speaker Nancy Pelosi had to say on the House floor before the vote.
We know we experienced the insurrection that violated the sanctity of the people's capital and attempted to overturn the duly recorded will of the American people. And we know that the President of the United States incited this insurrection, this armed rebellion against our common country. He must go. He is a clear and present danger to the nation that we all love.
The article of impeachment now heads to the Senate, where lawmakers will hold a trial and decide whether or not to convict President Trump. For more, I'm joined now by CBSN legal analyst Rebecca Roiphe. She is also a professor of law at New York Law School. Rebecca, good to have you with me. So with the Senate in recess until January 19th, a trial wouldn't get underway until right after the president's term has ended. What does the Constitution say about an impeachment trial for someone who's no longer in office?
Well, like with so many things, the Constitution is not clear about whether or not the president could be impeached or tried for his impeachment after he leaves office. And when lawyers can't tell from the explicit text, they look at several things. They look at specific language provisions, they look at the purpose of the provision, and sometimes they look at history. And I think that the bulk of all three of those things point in the direction of the Senate's ability to try the president after he's left office. First, because initially the text says, well, you know, you can impeach a president. And a lot of people think, well, that means he has to be a president while you impeach him. But of course, he's already impeached. The question is only whether or not he could be tried after he's left office now. The second thing is the purpose of this provision. So some people say, well, the purpose of this provision is clearly to remove him from office. So if he's not in office, it's all over. But that kind of overlooks the fact that there's another explicit provision in the Constitution that allows for him to be disqualified from ever serving in an office again. So the purpose of the provision is not just to remove him, but also potentially to disqualify him, which would be relevant here. And finally, in terms of history, this has been done frequently with other sorts of officials, and that tends to make it seem as if it could be done here.
Well, Rebecca, how could we see this impeachment trial actually differ from the president's first trial last year? It already feels so much different.
Right. Well, I think, you know, that's actually the main thing, is that it will feel different in part because it doesn't seem like it will fall quite as much on partisan lines. And that will make it feel much more substantive, I believe. In part, that is also because the Democrats, by the time he is tried, will likely control the Senate. And that will allow them to set some of the rules. Specifically, if you remember from the last impeachment, there was no evidence allowed. The Democrats wanted to introduce evidence, and the Republicans blocked that effort. Here, it's not clear whether the Democratic managers would want to introduce evidence, but if they did, they would likely be able to do that. And one could think of them potentially calling somebody like Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger. He was the one who was on that call where President Trump pressured him to find the votes. Now that incident is mentioned in the articles of impeachment, so it's entirely possible that they could bring somebody like him in as a witness. It's unclear. Maybe they don't need any witnesses because, of course, all of them were witnesses since they experienced this firsthand.
That's interesting. What are some of the legal defenses that we could see from the president's team? And speaking about that defense team, how could it complicate matters if his counsel includes Rudy Giuliani, who many people also blame for the attack on the Capitol?
Right. So, you know, I think one of the central defenses here will be, especially listening to what the congressmen were saying today in his defense, I think one of the central defenses here will be, no, he wasn't inciting a mob. In fact, what he was doing was urging his supporters to go protest peacefully. And at the back of that is both a factual claim and a legal claim. The factual claim, he never said go, storm the Capitol. He only said, go there. And the legal claim is that this is protected, First Amendment protected speech. So, there are a couple of problems with this defense. One is the factual one, which is, we always look at context as lawyers. We don't just take one statement. We look at all of the context together. So it's a little hard to suggest that he was only encouraging peaceful protest, given all of the things that he had said leading up to this one rally. And so in terms of the legal argument that this is protected speech, you hear a lot of his supporters already promoting this. And I think Alan Dershowitz has now come out behind this. And I think it's an important thing to keep our eye on, this question of protected speech. We are a democracy, and it is extremely important not to try people for incitement when what they're engaged in is kind of extreme political speech. However, here we're not talking about a private individual. We're talking about the President of the United States. And the First Amendment is meant to protect private individuals, not government actors. So I think that will pose a bit of a difficulty in terms of these legal questions. But your final point is an important one also, which is, it isn't really entirely like us lawyers will love to talk about the law, but it isn't really a legal proceeding. In some ways, it really is a political one. So all of these questions, can you impeach somebody after they've left office? Would this be First Amendment protected speech? Normally, you would think that's something a court would decide. But we're in this strange land where impeachment is really a sort of political process, and courts will likely try to stay out of it as much as possible. So these are questions that might be decided by political will, not, in fact, by the normal mechanisms that we think of when we think of legal questions.
Well, along those lines, do you think that it potentially hurts the president that he didn't come out initially to condemn the violence? In fact, that first statement, when rioters were still at the Capitol, talking to them directly, said, "We love you." We have heard from him now saying that he condemns violence of all kinds and he wants the law and order to rule the day. But it was a long time in getting to the statement that we just heard from the president. Will all of that potentially hurt his defense case there?
Yes, I think absolutely. I mean, as I said, there were factual problems with the argument that he was only encouraging his followers to engage in peaceful protest. And one of the pieces of evidence, of course, it is after the fact, but it still goes to his state of mind. This fact that people were calling him and asking him to please, talks directly to his supporters, tell them not to engage in this sort of violence, call in whatever support that he could for the Capitol Police. And he was so silent for so long. And then when he did come out, he called the people patriots. And he said, "I love you," even after they were engaging in what was clearly violent and destructive rioting acts. So it's going to be a little bit hard for him to walk that back, even though this statement today was extremely good. It's extremely important that right now, whatever happens in impeachment, he has now sent a message against violence. And so that should be applauded. But in many ways, I think a lot of people are going to see that as too little, too late, and not actually relevant for his state of mind at that time. What's more relevant is what he did beforehand and in the immediate aftermath.
So as you say, it's all fundamentally political and not an actual court case. All right, Rebecca Roiphe, thank you.
So nice being here.